booked and then come take my hand. We're rebels with a paperback plan.
Welcome to Booked and Banned, the podcast where we discuss essential literature that has faced challenges and censorship. Today, we're discussing A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. I'm Naomi, your host, and our guest this week is Lori, whom I met at West Point through a book club that still meets today. Lori, welcome to the show. Please tell our listeners a little bit about who you are.
Hi, Naomi. Thanks for having me on. Like Naomi said, I'm Lori. I was an Army civilian attorney for 40 years, retired for a couple of years. I now fill my days with pro bono work, and I'm also a mental health counselor and hypnotist, and I maintain a small practice. So that keeps me busy for most days, and I read.
Lori, it is a pleasure to have you here. Let's start by discussing John Irving's 1989 novel. The story is narrated by John Wheelwright from the vantage point of 1987. Plot centers on John's childhood in Gravesend, New Hampshire, and his lifelong friendship with Owen Meany, a boy of remarkably small stature with a distinct high-pitched voice. The trajectory of their lives is permanently altered during a Little League game when Owen hits a foul ball that strikes and kills John's mother. Rather than viewing the event as a random accident, Owen becomes convinced that he is an instrument of God and that his life follows a specific predestined path. The narrative unfolds across two timelines: the boy's upbringing in the 1950s and 60s, and John's later life in Canada, where he reflects on the events that led to Owen's eventual sacrifice during the Vietnam War. The plot follows Owen's meticulous preparation for a future he claims to have seen in a dream, culminating in a final orchestrated moment of heroism. While the length of A Prayer for Owen Meany makes it a heavy lift for a standard high school semester, it is considered a contemporary classic and frequently appears in advanced placement English literature and college-level contemporary fiction courses. It is often cited as a modern masterpiece and is a recurring title on the College Board's list of suggested works for the AP exam, valued for its complex structure and thematic density. Since its publication, the novel has faced numerous challenges in school districts, often leading to its removal from recommended reading lists or libraries. These censorship efforts typically focus on three areas: religious criticism. Many challenges stem from the book's portrayal of religious institutions. Critics often label the book as anti-Christian because of Owen's unorthodox spiritual claims and the narrator's biting commentary on the hypocrisy of church leadership and organized religion. Objectionable language and content. The novel's use of profanity and sexual references has led to its being labeled as, quote, pornographic or vulgar, unquote, in challenges across districts like Kanawha County, West Virginia, and Pelham, Massachusetts. The critique of the Reagan administration. Beyond the religious and social controversy, the book is a sharp political document. The book's vocal opposition to the Vietnam War and its skepticism toward American foreign policy have occasionally been cited as grounds for its removal, particularly in more conservative districts. While the core plot takes place in the 1950s and 60s, the narrator, John Wheelwright, reflects on these events from the year 1987. This allows Irving to weave in a constant, scathing critique of the Reagan administration. John, writing from exile in Canada, expresses deep anger toward the American political climate of the late 1980s. He specifically targets the Iran-Contra affair. John uses his narrative to vent frustration over the scandal, viewing it as a symptom of a government that operates without accountability. Political apathy. Irving contrasts the intense, life-altering political engagement of the Vietnam era with what he characterizes as the quote, amnesia, unquote, or indifference of the American public during the Reagan years. Ronald Reagan and Oliver North. The text includes frequent diatribes where John attacks Reagan's leadership and North's testimony, viewing them as symbols of a dishonest American culture that has lost its moral compass. So, to start our conversation, what was it about A Prayer for Owen Meany, whether it was the characters, the themes, or the writing itself, that made you want to read this specific book?
It really was the writing. I had read The World According to Garp, really enjoyed the writing, and so I picked it up sort of randomly, although I don't know why you pick up a 650-page book randomly. And the writing and the plot kept me going through it.
Yeah, it was a very engaging read, I thought. I had not read anything by John Irving. I thought I had, but I had not. I'd seen some of the movies that had been made from his books, but I thoroughly enjoyed the writing. So the novel is famous for its intricate plotting, where seemingly minor details from the boy's childhood become essential by the end of the novel. How does Irving use this miraculous foreshadowing to make the case for Owen's belief in predestination?
I think there's kind of three things that I thought about in this. One was his lightness, both physically and I think spiritually. The book describes when the children would pick him up and sort of hand him around the room. The lightness appears again during his death scene when he floats away from the event, telling John, I can see you, but you're very small. So the lightness sort of pervades through. The second one I thought was seeing his rank and death date on the paper mache tombstone during the Christmas pageant. And then the third one was, of course, the shot, perfecting the shot, getting the timing down to below 4 seconds, and how that sort of also pervaded through the book, not only when they were children, but then also when they were at the hotel or the motel in Arizona, and Owen thought that maybe they should practice the shot again. So it was a theme throughout the book, the shot, that I think sort of knit together this idea that Owen was convinced of his fate, convinced of his story, and did things, whether consciously or unconsciously, although I think consciously, to make sure that it happened the way it was supposed to happen.
Well, and a note for our readers who may not have read the book, the shot refers to taking a shot in basketball. That's what they were practicing. It was a lot of fun when they were doing it. Owen's dialogue is famously written in capital letters to represent his unique high-pitched voice. Beyond the physical sound, how did this stylistic choice affect your perception of Owen's authority and his claim to be God's instrument?
I thought that the use of all caps was very effective. I paid more attention to his dialogue, I think, than I might have, because his dialogue was always moving the story forward. So he certainly commanded authority over both adults and other children, his parents, and even over John, who was his best friend. And I think the use of the all caps kind of encapsulated the way that could happen. So not only was the high pitched screaming voice, but I think it was conveyed very well on the page by the use of the all caps.
Yeah, I thought it was very effective too. And you also got the sense that Owen always had to scream, otherwise he could not be
He could be
heard.
heard.
So John Wheelwright narrates the story from 1987, frequently interrupted by his anger toward the Reagan administration and the Iran-Contra affair, which was actually very current or had just passed when Irving was writing the novel. How does this late 80s present day change the way we view the 1950s and 60s flashbacks?
I think in John's mind, it probably made it seem like a simpler, more innocent time because of the really cynical view he has in 1987 of the world and especially the United States, and where he came from, and contrasting that with what was going on. Although the oddity of what was going on was apparent, They were boys living their lives, living pretty good lives, John being wealthier than Owen, kind of bringing him along. But certainly it also created, I think, a longing in John for those simpler times and those more innocent times and perhaps those less corrupt times in his mind of what was going on, and maybe buying into Owen's belief that his life was directed, and now things seemingly out of control in 1987 with Iran-Contra and the Reagan administration. Even in the face of tragedy, life was still simpler and more innocent for them as children than it was in 1987 with his views of what was going on.
John and Owen's childhood does come across as very idyllic in the way that Irving writes it. And it seems to at least be that way in John's memory, but the way that it comes across on the page, it does make all of us seem to want that sort of simpler time. We can also see at the same time how complicated John's life really was. Maybe not so much as a child, but his family life and the family dynamic, losing his mother, having a very strong willed grandmother, not knowing who his father is, though that's ultimately revealed toward the end of the book. I just found it really delightful the way that that paradox could exist in this novel. The book is filled with recurring symbols of, quote, arm topping and disarmament, unquote, such as the dressmaker's dummy and the armadillo. What do you think Irving is saying about the cost of faith and the physical sacrifices required of Owen and John's mother, and perhaps John himself?
So first, and this may be taking it too far, Owen himself is very disarming. His physical size, his voice, his command and authority as a child, no one like him. I think what Irving was saying is that real faith requires regular sacrifice. In Owen's mind, God over self. At one point when they were children and something had happened during a Christmas pageant, Owen looks up and says, "What would you have me do?" or "What do you want me to do here?" So he felt like because he was doing God's bidding that he really had to sacrifice sort of everything to make sure that he was doing the right thing at the right time. I think he was also saying that we're basically helpless in the face of fate by not having hands and arms, that we are subject to kind of whatever happens to us. And without the ability maybe to ultimately direct it. And that these sacrifices are almost expected and necessary, including horrible things like Tabby's death, John's mother's death. Also, I think obviously the loss of the arms foreshadows Owen's actual death, or the manner of Owen's death. Owen's voice and size, I think itself is a sacrifice to be God's instrument. I think that completely interwoven within the story, this idea of faith over fate and sacrifice in order to make faith make sense and to work.
I want to come back to the topic of faith in a second, but I'm going to do a little bit of an aside on this idea of disarmament, because I think Irving is playing with words here, or he's playing with symbolism. The whole idea with the Iran-Contra scandal and selling arms from one nation to another to give the money to another nation. And this was also during a time of a lot of talk about nuclear disarmament. So I do think Irving's having a little bit of fun with this and with that concept, which I thought was delightful. But coming back to the question of faith, my husband read this novel, and my husband is an avowed atheist, but he read it many, many years ago. And now, of course, he remembers nothing about it. But I was like, it's very interesting that you went through a 650-page novel that talks a lot about faith when you are someone who is very, anti-religion for himself. He's fine with it for other people, but he doesn't want to be a part of organized religion, doesn't believe in God, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that the fact that there is so much discussion of faith and what it is and what it isn't in this novel, and almost the caricatures of the ministers from different Protestant denominations, and the Meany family's disaffection from the Catholic Church. I thought all of that was very interesting. And I think Irving is also getting to a place where he's putting forth his own view of what faith is, and it's not necessarily in the trappings of religion per se. So I
No,
don't know.
I agree with you with that. And I didn't think about the whole nuclear disarmament and the arms to the Iran Contras. That's very clever. And I think you're right. Irving is used the book to, I think, espouse his own political views about the Reagan administration and the Iran Contra affair, used the book to espouse his own views about organized religion and the sort of the faith and fate and how one supports the other but can exist separately from each other and does between Owen and John, for example. He's a very clever writer and very interestingly wove it through the entire book.
Throughout the novel, John remains a skeptic, while Owen Meany possesses an absolute, unwavering certainty in his divine purpose. How does the book challenge the traditional boundary between faith and fate? Though I think we're already talking about this. Let's go deeper. And what do you think Irving is suggesting about the difference between true spirituality and the organized religious institutions he often satirizes?
So Owen's faith in his fate is absolute. He had the dream. He saw his rank and death date on the paper mache tombstone. Everything that he did was planned to that final moment. So his faith, absolute. John's faith, I think, is superficial, except for his faith in Owen as a friend. The difference between spirituality and religion, Owen, I think, is truly spiritual and absolutely not religious. And it shows in his disdain for organized religion, for the clergymen of the various Protestant churches, as we had just mentioned. Whereas John, I think, religious, maintaining a relationship with the church even through adulthood, not necessarily very spiritual. I think that there is a very marked difference between how Owen and John perceive the spiritual world as it is. And it's never clear because of John's not disdain, but certainly skepticism, like you said, of the various organized religion, and finding out that his own father is an ineffective member of the clergy. Religious but not spiritual, maintaining his relationship with the church even through adulthood, but I think never maintains or attains spirituality in the same way that Owen certainly had it from childhood forward.
I do think you're right that his faith was in Owen as a human being, and that Owen actually knew what he was doing. John seemed to be a religious practitioner because that is what one does, and that is what one has been raised to. And even as an adult living in Canada, he's a member of a church. He teaches at a private parochial type school. He's involved with his church. He gets kicked off the board for whatever reason. Having been on a religious institutions board myself, I know that it's a lot of personality management. It's not really about faith. It's about personalities and trying to get things done for the institution. And so I found that hilarious as well. But it's his faith in Owen is what is the most steadfast. And I thought that was really fascinating. What is the primary thought or legacy of this novel that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the primary focus of the book is that true faith is a gift, no matter what you believe in. So whether you believe in another human being, whether you believe in God, whether you believe in whatever you believe in or not, true faith, I think, has to attach to something. Again, whether human, whether non-human. And to do that, I think leads to a better life.
I could not agree more. So, Lori, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about A Prayer for Owen Meany with us today. Our next episode will be a discussion of Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, the definitive edition. And thank you all for joining us today. As Isaac Asimov said, any book worth banning is a book worth reading.
Booked and banned and bound by pages, stories hiding through the ages. Wish whisper truths that still ring clear for those who choose to listen here.